Some things quietly disappear: a mother's voice, the shadow of a father figure, or a familiar laugh inside the house. But there are some things that hide for years. They just wait until the right time comes. This story begins with a man confronting his past and discovering a truth hidden behind closets. Ethan Moore was a 33-year-old software developer. He had built his life in the city, and not distances but years separated him from his mother. When his mother, Helen, passed away a few months ago, she left behind an old-fashioned house, a few belongings, and a closet full of silence. When Ethan returned to his small town to close that detached house that was his mother's legacy, he entered that house trying to fit his feelings into his suitcase. The living room of the house still carried his mother's scent, like a light lavender, a little cleaning detergent, a little forgotten flowers. That evening, he went up to the attic alone. Old books, magazines, unused carpets. But what really caught his attention was a large closed wooden chest leaning against the wall. His mother would never let him open this chest. "It's the past, it's empty stuff," she would always say. But now it was the past. She was about to stop being silent. When she opened the chest, she found old albums, children's clothes, a few jewelry boxes, and yellowed envelopes. One of the albums particularly caught her attention. "The Early Years" was written in red on the cover. The first few pages in the album were his baby photos, but when she reached the fourth page, she froze. She could neither recognize herself in the baby photo that appeared before her, nor could she remember a memory her mother had mentioned before. The following was written underneath: Noah, 1989. Ethan was born in 1990. The photo was from a year ago, and this boy was not himself. Dear viewer, have you ever come across a stranger hidden in your own life? Has a photo, a trace, a name made you question? Write in the comments, because Ethan's life would never be the same again. Ethan immediately browsed through other albums, but there was no other sign of the name Noah. He found only an envelope. On it was written in his mother's handwriting, "Do not open unless necessary." He opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. The letter began with the following sentence: "Dear Ethan, if you are reading these lines, it means I have not been able to put off the things I need to say any longer." Ethan's heart began to race. The letter mentioned a baby named Noah, and Helen had used strange expressions to describe his birth. "When I held him in my arms, I learned what it meant to be a mother. But then, everything changed." How could a mother describe the birth of another baby in a letter to her own son like this? At the end of the letter, Helen had written, "You are my darling, Ethan. But there are some things you will have to understand, because some bonds are not made by blood, but by heart." Ethan suddenly had difficulty breathing. Was this letter saying that his mother had adopted him, or was it something more complicated? The last sentence of the letter was, "To find out who Noah is, open the little wooden drawer downstairs." Ethan went down to the kitchen immediately. He opened the old brown drawer by the wall. There was only one thing inside, an old cassette tape. It had only the words, "Noah, recording." Dear viewer, sometimes a cassette tape, a voice, brings back not only the past, but also a life. This was not just the story of a photograph, but of an identity. Ethan took out the old tape recorder from the storage room of the house to play the tape. It was a dusty but working device. He put the tape in, pressed the play button, and the first voice that came out of the tape was his mother's. But Helen spoke in a tone he had never heard before. "Noah, if you ever hear this tape," Ethan's fingers closed around the edge of the tape because he understood at that moment. In this story, Noah was not someone else's name, but a name that was substituted for his own. Or maybe that was his real name. Ethan was now on the verge of a decision. To learn meant everything would change, but not to learn would mean leaving his own life unfinished. Dear viewer, if it were you, would you want to find out? Write in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe, because as these secrets are revealed, real identities are revealed. Ethan closed his eyes as the tape rewound. There was no sound in the house. His mother's voice was cracked but firm. There was a tone that made it clear that the words he had suppressed for years were now coming to life. There was a trembling past in Helen's voice, but also a compassionate expectation. "Noah, if you're hearing this tape, then I have nothing left to hide. I want to tell you the truth, because every child deserves to know who they are." Ethan turned up the volume on the tape. In the dim light of the living room, he felt as if his mother were sitting right across from him. It was as if he were in a time machine. For the first time, he was witnessing the story a mother can go back in time and not even tell herself. "In June 1989, I was faced with a decision. I am not the woman who gave birth to you, but I was the one who first held you in my arms. I was on duty at the hospital that day, a nurse. A night shift, another birth occurred. It was an emergency birth. Your mother, your real mother, disappeared right after the birth." Ethan's heart began to race. It was like being in a novel, but he was the main character. "We couldn't leave the baby alone. We waited for days, but no one came. You were left alone. And then I started looking after you." The voice paused. Then Helen's breathing was heard. She was catching her breath. "I fed you, I changed your diapers, I loved you. I never wanted to leave you. And then the adoption process began through official channels. But Noah, the woman who gave birth to you, couldn't even write her name down. Just the first letter, L. She disappeared without telling us anything." Ethan stood up. He put the tape in his hand down. His mothers had adopted him when he was an orphan. But why hadn't she told him all these years? Helen continued, "I named you Ethan. We made a fresh start. No moment in raising you made you feel less like my son. But I always knew deep down that this moment would come one day. I just didn't pick the right time. I was afraid of upsetting you, but I don't want to leave you with half a story." Ethan sat down on the couch, his knees weak. The truth was raging through his head like a storm. That baby photo. Noah, 1989. So, it really was him. His mother had said something else at the end of the tape. If you hear that voice and still want to know the truth, then there's something else in the garage, in the blue bag, the only official document that connects you to that world. It may not take you to that woman, but it makes you who you are. Ethan quickly went down to the garage. He found a blue backpack among the items that hadn't been touched for years. Inside was an envelope, a sealed adoption document on it, and inside was written, "Mother's name, L. Matthews." Ethan read the file with a tremor. His mother's name, that stranger he only knew by letters. He was a little closer now. Dear viewer, do you think blood ties or the love raised together is stronger? As the questions multiplied in Ethan's mind, he realized something else. At the bottom of the envelope was an address. The note read, "If ever you want to know, go to this address." The address belonged to a nursing home in another city, and a small note attached to it, L. Matthews, date of birth, 1965, date of admission, 2017. No visitors. Ethan swallowed hard when he saw this information. That woman had been silent for years. She had never called. But maybe now she was ready to tell something. Or maybe she didn't remember at all. Dear viewer, would you like to go to someone who left you years ago, to look into their eyes and ask, why? Are you ready for this? Write in the comments and subscribe, because this story is not just a search for identity, it is a heart's search for answers. Ethan packed his suitcase. He had now opened the door to the past, and behind that door was the gaze of a mother who had been silenced for years. The journey was silent. As Ethan looked out the bus window, he thought about his childhood, his mother's smiles, the warm sandwiches she had given him during his school days, the bandages she had pressed to his knee when he first fell. So many memories, so much silent love. And now, he was going to knock on a stranger's door. Maybe the woman who gave birth to him, maybe just the shadow of the past. The nursing home was a building that had faded under the constant wind by the seaside. When he entered the door, time seemed to pass more slowly. The attendant at the entrance looked at him and took his name. "The reason for your visit?" he asked, and Ethan swallowed. He couldn't answer. Then he could only say, "I want to see L. Matthews." The attendant nodded. "Third floor, number 14, but his situation is a bit complicated. His memory sometimes goes in and out." Ethan nodded and slowly headed for the stairs. With each step, the past became heavier. Finally, she stopped in front of door number 14. The door was ajar. Inside, sitting in the armchair by the window, was a woman. Her hair was snow white, her face full of fine lines. She was holding a knitting needle in her hand, her eyes staring out. She was surrounded by the silence that mixed with the sound of the waves. Ethan stepped inside. The woman turned her head. Her eyes paused for a moment when she saw Ethan. There was no recognition in that look, no strangeness. "Hello?" Ethan said. "I came to ask you something." The woman bowed her head. "Sit," she said. Her voice was not that of a mother, but that of a woman who had not spoken for a long time. Ethan sat down. In her palms, she held the letter, the adoption certificate, and the old photograph. She handed them to the woman. The woman did not look at the file. She just stared at the photograph for a long time. Then the words came from her lips. "I know her." That photograph was once the only thing I could never let go of. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. He had to ask. "Is it me?" he said. The woman raised her eyes. She looked at Ethan's face carefully. Then she nodded slowly. "Yes, but I couldn't even name it at the time. I was running away from my whole life." Tears streamed down Ethan's cheeks. He had been in a silence that had been silenced for years, but that silence was now turning into an explanation. The woman continued, "I was too young. When your mother, or Helen, took you, I was in another country. I couldn't go back. I was scared. I was inadequate. That woman was more of a mother to you than I was, and I disappeared so I wouldn't hurt you." Ethan bowed his head. While anger was a feeling she had expected, a strange peace filled her, because the answers had finally come. The woman held Ethan's hand with trembling fingers. "Did you grow up?" she asked. "Did they take good care of you?" Ethan smiled. "They loved me, and I loved them. But now I have come to understand you too. Why did you keep quiet? Why did you leave? I just wanted to know now." The woman could not hold back her tears. "Can you forgive me?" she said. Ethan did not answer. He just held her hand a little tighter. Because sometimes forgiveness does not begin with words, but with a silent handhold. Dear viewer, if it were you, could you forgive someone who left you? Maybe forgiveness would not change some things, but it was necessary for those who carry some burdens to continue walking. Ethan left his mother's room carrying in his pocket the letter, the photograph, and the echoes of a past he was hearing for the first time. But in his heart, he had peace. A few weeks later, an envelope arrived from the nursing home. Inside was a letter and a small wooden toy. The letter read, "Ethan, I always wanted to make you a toy. It was the only thing I could do. But now I know that love lives not only in blood, but also in time." L. Ethan took that letter to Helen's grave. He placed it on the ground and whispered softly, "Mom, I didn't choose you, but you chose me, and now I choose the past in every way." Dear viewer, this story is not just the solution to a mystery. This story is the story of putting the pieces of an identity together. A man who grew up with a mother's love shows compassion to another mother's silence. A true family is not only formed by giving birth, but by loving. If you too have stopped for a moment and felt your heart in this story, subscribe to the channel. Because here, not only secrets are revealed, unfinished stories are completed.